American Jews and America, The Mission of Israel Revisited. David Novak, Rabbi, Congregation Darche Noam, Far Rockaway, New York. Adjunct Associate Professor, Department of Philosophy, Baruch College, City University of New York. Page 1. 1. An American Jew can see his or her relationship to America in one of four ways, and which of these four ways is assigned prime importance ultimately reveals how that Jew is related to Judaism itself. 1. Some American Jews see their relationship to America in essentially juridical terms. In other words, they see themselves as the anonymous legal personalities who are the subjects of the law of this democracy. Many of these same Jews have been in the leadership of other Americans who resist any emphasis of the interests of subgroups, hyphenated Americans, in American public life. For them, America is still the melting pot, which is supposed to create but one enduring public realm, devoid of special interest. 1. For all such Americans, this public realm is the primary source of human values. For these Jews, Judaism has been at most reduced to a denomination of like-minded individuals, and at least it has been eliminated from their lives altogether. Even when just restricted but not eliminated, Judaism has been relegated to a very private and esoteric place. Needless to say, this creates a rather tenuous relationship with Judaism itself, which, in the words of the Talmud, does not approve of being placed in a corner, only to be studied by whomever wants to do so. 2. Furthermore, as the studies of Richard John Neuhaus and others have made abundantly clear, this is not the vision of America shared by a large majority of Americans now or ever. 3. In some significant ways, these Jews have become what might be called constitutional fundamentalists, like more recognizable fundamentalists. Page 2. Whom many of these Jews would be horrified to find themselves in the same logical company. They read sacred texts, for them the Constitution of the United States, outside the context of history, either the history of the American people or the history of their own Jewish people. All of this makes their position, outside of American courtrooms of course, rather difficult to advocate. In a significant way, these Jews are among the last doctrinaire secularists in America. 4. 2. Some American Jews see their relationship to America in essentially political terms. In other words, they see themselves as members of a special interest group in the overall fabric of American power politics. As a special interest group, Jews have a distinct political agenda of concerns: the military and economic security of the State of Israel, the emigration of Soviet Jews, the elimination of restrictive quotas, which would restrict Jews having full access to education and other opportunities, by limiting these opportunities to the actual percentage of the population Jews constitute. Like any successful special interest group in America, and it has been as said by friend and foe alike, that the Jews might very well be the most successful special interest group in America today, Jews have had to argue that their special interests in fact coincide with the general American interest, or even better, they have argued that they actually promote the general interest. Thus, for example, the valid portrayal of Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East not only establishes an affinity between Americans and Israelis, but it is actually presented as part of the even more forceful argument that Israel is America's only stable and reliable ally. Page 3. In the region. 5. Usually, these Jews are less reluctant to remove their Judaism from their public life. They are more visibly Jewish than most of the previous group. Nevertheless, to a large extent, their Jewish self-definition is determined by reaction to external threats. Arab threats to the security of the State of Israel, Soviet threats to Jewish survival in Russia, and the threats of other minorities to Jewish opportunity in America. To a certain extent, they confirm the famous thesis of Jean-Paul Sartre, died in 1980, that it is anti-Semitism which in fact determines who and what is a Jew. 6. Moreover, by being so externally oriented, many of these same Jews have not had sufficient concern for the internal aspects of Jewish survival, what might be called the cultural aspects of Jewish life. Such matters as Jewish education, especially as intensely pursued in yeshivas and day schools, the threat of intermarriage and cultural assimilation, and the deteriorating Jewish quality of Jewish family life. Not only has this political Judaism elevated a part of Judaism, and certainly not the most important part, to a level of almost total concern and, thus, caused more thoughtful and learned Jews to question its ultimate Jewish authenticity, it also creates problems in dealing with a large segment of Americans, mostly Christian Americans, who do not see political affiliation and activism as the most fundamentally characterizing factor of a community. These Jews are often embarrassingly unprepared for what pro-Jewish Gentiles now expect from them. Page 4. 3. Some American Jews see their relationship to America in essentially cultural terms. In other words, they see America as a pluralistic society in which Jewish cultural identity is to be maintained without a loss of political power or legal rights. For these Jews, and they are certainly not alone in this age of emphasis on ethnicity, most forcefully spearheaded by the whole "black is beautiful" phenomenon, America is a loose network of ethnic and religious communities, having a sort of tacit contract with the polity as a whole. That is to say, the polity's political and legal primacy will be affirmed in return for not only the passive tolerance, but the active encouragement of ethnic particularity. 7. Thus, not so long ago to be American in the cultural sense was at least to behave like a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, even if not actually joining the Episcopal Church. Now these same former role models have become just one more ethnic group along with the rest of us immigrants and their children, and not even primus inter pares, the WASPs. This cultural Judaism has certainly led to an even more visible and more internally lived Jewishness than that of the previous group of political Jews. To cite a personal example, I still marvel at the ease my children feel in being practicing Jews in America today, compared with the self-consciousness practicing Jews of my generation felt. When we were their age, there are also more of us now than before. 8. Nevertheless, one could see this as wanting in terms of the theory of Jewishness, more Jews ascribe to than any other, even though fewer actually understand it. That is to say, Zionism. For if page 5, the Jews are essentially a cultural group, as Zionism asserts, then their chances for cultural survival and growth are far greater in a society where they constitute the clear majority, in a land filled with their historical associations, than in a land where they are a small minority of relative newcomers. These Jews, by their emphasis on culture, are thus the most vulnerable to the Zionist doctrine of Shelalat Hagola, the negation of the diaspora, which asserts that Jewish culture outside of Israel is inevitably doomed, especially when the Jewish state exists and is developing Jewish culture. 9. Furthermore, although many of these cultural Jews would see their culture as inextricable from their religion, their self-definition is rarely based on the classical Jewish doctrines of divine election and covenant. And this not only makes their connection with classical Judaism tenuous, it still does not enable them to respond to the sincere beseeching of those Americans who feel the greatest affinity with the Jewish people, including the State of Israel. In other words, Christians who have cleansed themselves of anti-Semitism, which they now regard as anti-Christian. These friends look to Jews to speak as the covenanted people of God. They ask for Jews to speak the language of Torah. When Christians asked, often demanded, that we Jews speak in a language they assigned us, a language rejecting our own vocabulary from intelligibility, then we were correct to suspect those Jews who were willing to respond in their terms. However, this objection hardly applies when we are now being asked by many Christians in America to, as Scripture puts, page 6, instruct us from his ways. Micah 4 verse 2. 4. Finally, there is a fourth group of Jews which has always been quite small, but who have included some of the most important religious thinkers in the Jewish community, who see their relationship to America in essentially religious terms. Now there is a good deal of overlapping between these religious Jews and the cultural Jews discussed above, especially when cultural is not a Jew's synonym for anti-religious, as it has been for those who saw culture as almost an exclusively linguistic phenomenon, such as Yiddish culture or Hebrew culture. Certainly, those whose Judaism is essentially religious are committed to Jewish culture, in other words, the Hebrew language, a recognizable and authentic Jewish lifestyle, the State of Israel. For all of these cultural factors have religious origins and structures. In fact, this could be said about all historical culture. Thus, the error of the anti-religious Jewish culturalists was as much based on their ignorance or distortion of culture, which comes from the Latin cultus, 10, as it was based on their reduction of Judaism to Jewishness. 2. What distinguishes these religious Jews from merely cultural Jews is their relationship with the non-Jews, which in America primarily means their relationship with Christians. Although these religious Jews would agree with even the juridical Jews and the political Jews that we cannot accept the notion of Christian. Page 7. America, they do recognize to a greater extent than these other types of Jews that Americans are indeed more predominantly Christian than anything else. For it is indisputable that classical Judaism in both its scriptural and rabbinic developments has been concerned with what God demands of the Gentiles, as well as what God demands of the Jews, albeit not equally. 11. As such, our relationship with American Christians concerns what God demands, here and now of our respective communities, and how and why these demands do indeed coincide on crucial public issues more often than not. Heretofore, this essentially religious approach to Jewish life in America has taken one of two forms. The first, that of liberal Judaism, the second, and interestingly enough, the newer phenomenon, that of traditional Judaism. I avoid using the denominational labels Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, because they do not apply precisely enough to the intellectual typology I am employing in this paper. Liberal Judaism, first in the thought of its German progenitors, and later in the thought of their American disciples and successors, in response to the new relationship with the Gentiles that came with the emancipation, developed the idea of the mission of Israel. This idea was that Judaism not only is not a particularistic ethnic fossil, to use Toynbee's infamous characterization, to be overcome in the progress of history, but that Judaism is the true vanguard of that universal culture, which the modern world proclaimed Weltgeschichte in Hegel's terminology. 12. Because of its unique theology of ethical monotheism. The theory of ethical. Page 8. Monotheism was based on the assumption that the essence of Judaism is its ethical content, which, following Kant, unquestionably the modern philosopher, who made the greatest impression on liberal and even traditional Jews, is essentially characterized by its universalizability. 13. Since this ideal ethical culture has not yet been historically realized, and since Judaism and the Jewish people understand and maintain its pristine purity, better than all others, Jews are therefore required to preserve their unique cultural and religious identity, in the interest of this not yet achieved messianic climax of universal history. Those aspects of Jewish tradition which seem to be not only particularistic, but anti-universal were to be reformed as unworthy of the ethical essence of Judaism. In Germany, this Reformation was theorized rather conservatively by such theologians as Hermann Cohen, died in 1918, and Leo Baeck, died in 1956. 14. In America, it was more radically theorized and implemented by such theologians as Kaufmann Kohler, died in 1926, and Emil G. Hirsch, died in 1923. 15. Both sons-in-law and disciples of the radical Reform theologian David Einhorn, died in 1879, whose impact on American Jewish life and thought was less than theirs primarily because he came to America earlier than they, and his speech and writing remained exclusively German. The idea of the mission of Israel as the corollary of ethical monotheism or prophetic Judaism gained additional impetus in America by coming at the same time and being possibly influenced by the social gospel school of thought advocated by Walter Rauschenbusch, died in 1918, and other Protestant thinkers. All of this, page 9, was an attempt to see religion as providing the true ethical impetus for a culture and society which were becoming more and more secular in both theory and practice. For Jews, especially, this was a rather audacious attempt to relate classical Judaism to contemporary American life without dropping Judaism altogether, as did the former Rabbi Felix Adler, died in 1933, the founder of the ethical culture movement. 16. One must admire the project as the first real attempt to define a Jewish religious participation in American life, existentially concerned with both Judaism and America, as a society where Jews need no longer drop Judaism in order to be true participants. Nevertheless, we rarely hear the slogan "Mission of Israel" any longer, let alone the idea articulated, even by liberal Jews. And I think this is because it did not find a conceptualization and an expression which truly spoke to the needs of either the Jews or America. First, those liberal Jews who advocated this idea were almost all anti-Zionists, perhaps the great exception being Stephen S. Wise, died in 1949. Zionism, as a nationalistic project for a sovereign Jewish state in the land of Israel, was anathema to these Jews who saw Judaism's mission as being its ethical teaching and leadership of an essentially non-sectarian America. However, most Jews, even most Reform Jews after the 1937 repudiation of the overtly anti-nationalistic position of 1885, have been too committed to what Mordecai M. Kaplan, died in 1983, called Jewish peoplehood, to define Judaism in what seemed to be Protestant denominational terms. 17. The Holocaust and the establishment of the State of Israel in the, page 10, 1940s, made this historical persistence an absolute political necessity. Thus, the mission of Israel seemed to be inauthentically Jewish, on both cultural, religious, and political grounds. Second, the social and political program of the advocates of the mission of Israel was always rather vague on specific issues. When push came to shove, they almost always came out in favor of the liberal political programs of those whose basic outlook was secular. Always in the background one could hear the ghost of Felix Adler, well-trained philosopher, that he was cutting away at this theology with Occam's razor, that is to say, asking what was uniquely Jewish or should be uniquely Jewish about this approach, to merely assign its scriptural origins, rather doubtful anyway in its liberalized version, is to commit the congenital fallacy 18. If it was not, then still calling it the mission of Israel could only smack of chauvinism. One suspects, therefore, that the enthusiasm for the mission of Israel, expressed from so many pulpits earlier in this century, was more for the sake of showing Judaism to be au courant intellectually and socially than actually attempting to redirect America in a more Jewishly approved way. Perhaps the greater ease that third, fourth, and even fifth-generation American Jews now feel in American culture and society makes these apologetic exercises anachronistic. However, something akin to the mission of Israel, although to my knowledge the slogan has never been used by these Jewish thinkers, has emerged in the most unexpected quarters, that is to say, among some of the most traditional Jewish thinkers in America, who are usually characterized by even their fellow Jews as xenophobic in